So there's been some real big changes with rent in advance. Anybody here ever took a tenant on that's paid 6 or 12 months rent in advance? Yep, lots of us. We all have done that because they may be coming from overseas, they may not have no credit history, they may offer to pay you 6 months rent in advance. Now, we're not able to take any more than 1 month's rent in advance. Okay? So that means all of those people that would have been able to get a property because they could pay in advance, they're out the market now. There is a grey area here because there is a caveat in the legislation that states unless the tenant offers. Now, we as a letting agency have decided it's too grey and it's too risky because a tenant can say, well, I didn't really offer. They told me that was the only way I was going to get the property and I had to pay it up front and it was the only way that they would rent to me. And we probably would say that to somebody that didn't pass referencing, wouldn't we? We wouldn't just, So for us, we've took a decision that we are only going to take 1 month's rent in advance. We're no longer going to take 6 months or 12 months because it's just too risky. The penalties and fines are too high. That's quite straightforward, but there's another thing that I need you to bear in mind, and this is where it's made it quite complex for us as a letting agent and will for you guys as landlords. Now, normally what we would do is we would show a tenant around a property and take a 1-week holding deposit to reserve the property for them. We can't take any more than that under the tenant fee ban. And a few days before the tenancy is due to start, we would send them an email and request the security deposit and the rent in advance. Once we've got the money in our bank, we would then proceed to sign a tenancy agreement and get the landlord and the tenant to sign. Because we've got the money in the bank, the tenancy agreement signed, we hand over the keys. You can't do that anymore. You actually cannot request the rent from the tenant until the tenancy agreement is legally signed by both parties and executed. Now, you're all looking at me a bit blank, but what that means is this, right? It means that that you have signed a legally binding contract with the tenant. Me and you have signed the agreement, okay? So I'm agreeing to rent your property. And we've both signed a legal contract, and I choose not to pay the first month's rent. You've still got to give me the keys. But you can't ask them for the rent until the contract has been executed. But it's been signed by one person. Effectively, once you have both signed, whether they give you the money or not, you would have to give them the keys. Now, the reality is this, right? The reality is it's not going to happen. But you need to be aware that it could happen because requesting that money earlier, requesting that money and receiving that money before that you're due to have it can result in a £7,000 fine. So you imagine us as a letting agent, right? Multiple amounts of money comes into our bank on a daily basis, millions of pounds over the course of however many months. We've changed our process. So let me share with you our process because that may be helpful. So we're still going to do the holding deposit of 1 week's rent, okay? So we'll always have 1 week's rent from them as a minimum. We are then, once they have passed referencing, we are going to request the security deposit because you can lawfully do that. So you request the security deposit. And then once you are satisfied that the tenancy is ready to go and compliant, so you've got your gas cert, your EICR and all of your bits and all of your ID and everything, about 3 days before the move-in date, we are going to sign the tenancy agreement and request the rent, in the hope that we've then got 3 days to chase you down and tell you we're not going to give you the keys, but really we will lawfully need to if the case arises. But I think you will become aware quite quickly if there's going to be a problem with them paying. But we do all need to be mindful of this because it is a big change to the law. The tenant can volunteer more than 1 month. So if I was to come to you and view your property and say, I would like to take it, I would like to offer you 12 months rent in advance, then you can accept it. I can't come to your property and I say to you, I would like to rent it, and you say to me, only if you pay 12 months rent in advance. There's two different things here. The amount of rent that you take is one thing. It should be no more than 1 month. And when you ask and receive the rent is the other thing. So there's two things to consider here. You see, the thing is, if you go by the law, and I'm a letting agent, I have to tell you the law, right? The law basically states the contract needs to be executed, and an executed contract basically means, which is like an exchange, I agree to move into that property on that day. You agree to give me that property. I agree as part of that to pay you rent, but I fail on my part of the agreement. So why is it right for the tenant to fail, but like you're saying, I ain't giving you the keys? Then you failed. So then it becomes a battle of the wills. But truth be told, if I was a landlord and it was my property and I'm not acting as an agent, I wouldn't give them the keys. And I'd take my chances. You take me to court, off you trot. You will always have 1 week's worth of rent because if you've taken the holding deposit. But just bear in mind that when you take 1 week's rent, I mean, this is just getting really technical now, but remember I told you a tenant has to be 3 months in arrears before you can take action. If you've got 1 week's worth of rent, you're actually going to be waiting nearly 4 months for them to be in arrears. We had a tenant once that overpaid by a penny. You know what happened, don't you? We weren't 2 months in rent arrears by a penny. Because they're clever. And remember, we're sending them these, the information sheets, you may as well use it to go to the toilet. It's got no benefit to those tenants at all. It's stupid. But, it is what it is. And again, I'm very much with you. We're going to have to see how this goes. If this becomes a real big problem with tenants moving in and not paying their rent, it needs to be reviewed. Like, how does this benefit the tenant in any way, shape or form? How does this benefit anybody? It doesn't.